everyone, what's up and welcome. Today we're going to discuss a topic that a lot of people have been requesting that I see a ton of confusion about, and that is communication, or if you're cool, comms. This is a huge topic, so this is going to take multiple videos. This one is going to go over the basics, and I'm planning two more. One for solo queuers and one for six-man teams, 6 decks. Anyway, let's start by looking at how your role changes how you can communicate. Where you look strongly affects what sort of information you're getting, so everyone can benefit from this. It isn't just a solo queue or a team thing. We'll start with supports. Supports generally don't have to focus exclusively on the enemy players, and they spend most of their time either looking at their own team or around them. Because supports stand so far back and they have so much opportunity to look around at everything, they get a nice big picture of what's happening in addition to the specific behavior of enemy flankers. Because of this, supports are good at calling out flankers and seeing who on their team is in a bad position and are being ineffective. They're not as good, however, at spotting weaknesses in the enemy team's main line because the focus is on their own team's position and flankers. They also can't see who's really doing a lot of damage in the other team, who the biggest threat is, because like I said, they're focusing on their own team's health bars, on where their own team is. And remember, these are just tendencies and advantages. You can still be a support player and do things that I claim are disadvantageous. It just won't be as easy as on another role. These also don't follow Blizzard's rules or the traditional rules either. Torbjorn, for example, would fall into this category of being able to look around and having that freedom, while Anna might not, depending on how you play her. So keep that in mind as I go through the roles. Next, there are the DPS players. These are players very focused on the enemy's front line at all times. They have the advantage of being able to clearly see how the enemy approaches and how the opposing players are getting in and doing damage. They can spot enemies who are out of position and weaknesses in the other team's approach. They don't have the luxury of looking around very much, however, because as a McCree, for example, you have to constantly keep your crosshair in a specific spot to keep outputting damage. So because of this, they can't see flankers very well, nor can they really be as aware of what their own team is doing all the time. Basically, they're the complete opposite of supports in terms of what they're looking at. So all of the advantages of a support are the disadvantages of a DPS, and vice versa. Finally, there are tanks. These are the initiators and often have to be in a specific position to do their tanking duties properly. For example, Reinhardt blocking with his shield. They usually have almost no proper vision because they're in the middle of the fray. Think of a Reinhardt swinging his hammer or Winston flailing around. They can't see, they pretty much can't see anything. Because they can't really see their team to coordinate with them most of the time, the team has to follow them. So tanks should generally focus on communicating their own movements. That way, their team can always follow up, and they won't be confused when their Reinhardt suddenly drops his shield, for example. So that's it for hero roles. Don't go away yet, though, because I have another part. But in general, you should try to stick to your advantages in regards to your hero role when communicating with your team. Now, this isn't a hard and fast law of the universe or anything, but in general, when trying to deal with a flanker problem, chances are your supports have the most information to give, and if you're a DPS player, you should be attentive to them. If you're a tank, don't always try to be getting vision by swinging your neck around all the time. Leave that to your DPS and your supports, so on and so forth. The other thing I want to go over that everyone should know and is very important, and this is a hard rule, and the sooner you break this habit, if you have it, the better. It is stay positive. Wow, look at that. What a good smiley. Oh God, that's hideous. That's actually scary now. That's creeping me out. Okay, we're going to get rid of that. Anyway, stay positive. And I know that's so cheesy you can smell it from here, right? But this really is essential. There is a huge difference between if we get a Reinhardt, we can win the next fight. And we lost the last fight because we didn't have a Reinhardt. I know that that's a cliche, but let's look at one that will sound less traditionally toxic. How about we lost last fight because the Reaper snuck behind us? That actually sounds kind of reasonable, right? But in actuality, it's just as bad. Next fight, Mercy has to make sure Reaper doesn't sneak behind us and we'll win. Is on the surface kind of the same idea, but it has a much different result. It's much more positive. First of all, it isn't as negative and it's not bringing your team down, and that certainly is a thing, but that's just a minor part. I'm not here to tell you about the power of friendship and happy rainbows and stuff. I'm sure people have been telling you that all your life. If you're positive, people will like you more. But there's something else, something more important that differentiates these two different styles. See, when you make a positive statement, like the mercy one I just gave you the example of, you're making a specific call to action. Whether you're in a tournament or in solo queue, people will respond much better, and for very good reason, if you present a solution to a problem and confidence that it will work. Saying, if Mercy looks around and makes sure Reaper doesn't get behind us, next fight we'll win, gives your team a specific goal for the next fight. You're telling the Mercy to look around, and now your team can visualize together what's going to happen next fight and how it will end in victory. On the contrary, if you say, we lost last fight because Reaper snuck behind us, well, again, it doesn't sound too bad, right? That sounds kind of reasonable. There's no specific call to action. It's like, okay, so what do we do now? Also, it implies the next fight will be a loss as well, because you haven't given a solution to the problem. All you've said is we lost last fight because Reaper snuck behind us. So if you lost last fight and you don't have any solution, clearly you're going to lose the next fight as well. That's how people visualize it, at least. At the very least, it leads to people turning inward and trying to find their own solution, even if it's not bringing them down or anything. Like, maybe they won't communicate it, or maybe they'll think it is their fault. So now you have 5 other players all scheming their own individual solutions to the same issue, when you could have just given one solution yourself and everyone would be on the same page. This leads to a lack of coordination and teamwork, and eventually it breaks down and devolves into toxicity and fighting and all that bad stuff. At the very least, even if you don't have a solution yourself, ask your team specifically, hey guys, what are we going to do next fight to win? That way other people will give their solutions. Then you're all at least on the same page and you can visualize going to the next fight, doing something, and winning. Anyway, guys, I think I've gone over enough for this video. Like I said, this is just the overview. There are a lot more specifics to go over regarding this topic, and I will be going over them very soon in future videos. Communication is way different in solo queue versus organized play, and you can't use the same things you see. If you see, like, sometimes you see the scrim VODs with the comms and everything, you can't use those strategies in your solo queue games, and vice versa. So I have to make different videos for them. If you have any questions, though, feel free to ask and I'll answer them, or include them in future videos on communication, because I always like to look for feedback in the comments. Be sure to check out my Twitter link in the description. Follow and check out my mini tip series on hero abilities over there. I hope you enjoyed, maybe got something out of it, maybe even had a little bit of fun. So stay positive and have a great day. Peace out, guys.